Hello, I'm Leroy Garcia, and this is Blu-ray and Gallery Podcast. Today, we're going to be visiting with one of my most favorite artists, Eunika Rogers. But before we get to that, I would like to talk a little bit about Blu-ray's theory of how we collect art, how we represent art. One of the foremost things that I've been about was finding innovation with refinement. And so we're going to start this by talking about Doug West a little bit as an example. There are many landscape artists throughout this country, maybe millions of them. But the question is, what makes them different in their approaches to art? How are you going to stand out? How are you going to make a landscape different than anybody else? And Doug West was a very stereotypical example of detail-oriented. The painstaking time for every little brushstroke and a pointillistic method at times. This is the basis of what we're after. So let's go talk with Eunika Rogers and discuss her work. But this is a good starting point. Welcome to the gallery in Santa Fe, Eunika.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, in referencing a Doug West painting, there's probably a million landscape artists scattered throughout our country. Blue Rain has always been about innovation with refinement, which is what we're pointing out. And Eunika has definitely fit that bill. And we can reference to her past podcasts that we had with her. Go to blueraingallery.com and under the menu bar, go podcasts, and you can look her up. Also, we have a few blogs of her in process as well under the blog tab. Anyways, we love having Eunika here. It's been a long journey to get to Santa Fe. We've represented her in Durango almost specifically, but she's ready for Blue Rain Santa Fe. And let's talk a little bit about your processes again. What's so innovative about your paintings? What makes you different?
Well, all my paintings are done with natural materials, specifically clay. In this case, this is all clay, but I do use others, wine, mushrooms, flowers. They're mostly just kind of fun side pieces mainly done on watercolor paper, but I really like the idea of using clay. It's basically, obviously collected from the earth, and the colors are of the earth, and there's a feeling of a symbiotic relationship between us and the earth, so it kind of gives it a little bit more meaning.
Yeah, let us know a little bit. When did you first discover working with clay? What inspired you to experiment? Because that's different. You don't walk into a gallery and find paintings that are on canvas with clay or wine or mushrooms. Yeah. That's unusual. That's exactly what I'm referring to as far as innovation. That's an innovation, and so very unique, like her name, Eunika, right? Isn't that true? But let us know, what started this inspiration with clay? Where did this start?
So I got I majored in clay, in ceramics, really, and in undergrad, and then went on to master's and pursuing the medium of clay. I wanted to be a potter, and they would not let me be a potter because it was a folk. That's how they explain it. It was a folk take on art. And so there I was, trying to figure out what I want to do with clay being attached, that being attached to my major. And so I struggled, but I had this garbage can full of red Mississippi clay, which I foraged back when I was in undergrad. And they call it gumbo clay in Mississippi. It's very sticky. You have to get a hammer if it touches itself to your shoe. And so I started figuring out how to tame this clay because it was obviously very hard to work with. And I figured it out eventually after many explosions in a kiln. I did figure it out. But at the end of the journey, I noticed that my studio, my studio clothes mainly were covered, or stained, I should say, with this clay that would never wash. And so at this point,
So is it like you noticed it was like a stain?
it was a stain. I mean, a very beautiful stain. It was a red clay. And so then I had this idea. Obviously, I was nearing the end of my studies, that what I was going to do with these huge installations that I was making was hurting my back in the process. And so I thought, I'm going to transfer this into real life. And so ideas struck me, like, what if I can use this as a pigment, going from three-dimensional to two-dimensional? So I gave it a quick test, just pour some wet clay on canvas, and just kind of watched to see what it was going to do in it. And it was like super glue, it just stuck to the canvas. And so...
And who would have thought that? Because that's like, when I first saw these paintings, I was like, don't these rub off and stuff? You're like, no, it's stained into the canvas.
Yeah.
So you don't pre-gesso this canvas. It's just canvas,
Yeah,
right?
it's just raw canvas.
Painting on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the nature of clay is that when it's wet, it expands, and then when it shrinks, when it dries, it shrinks, and it's somehow the tiny particles of it attach themselves to the canvas, and it's like super glue. It just sticks.
Yeah, that is really cool, and that's what I'm talking about, the innovation, and that makes you extremely different than most artists, and that's a pretty cool process. So she has all kind. If you ever work with clay, there's all types of clay and colors that you can get. Most of the clay that she's using, you're digging yourself, right?
Yeah, I do forage. I love hiking. I'm a hiker. I'm a long distance runner, so finding clay on trail is kind of a fun activity to do. Besides just finishing the hike, I'm kind of gathering things on my hike.
So where are you hiking these days?
Well,
And how high?
well, I live in Colorado now, so I do a lot of hikes, obviously in the surrounding area. Unfortunately, the secret is I don't find much clay up there. I really just go there just for, just to kind of gather images, like obviously aspens and mountains, which I also paint. But the clay is found more down valley. The process called erosion. It just, the rains come, it just washes it off. And
are you looking at old riverbeds or like ditches and
riverbeds?
Stuff like that?
And that's the reason why, like in Colorado, there's a lot of clays, in Utah for that reason, just because that's where it all gets carried.
Well, this whole Southwest corridor is like that.
Yeah.
A lot of different types of clays, from micas to reds, whites, all kinds of colors. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And stuff. So let's talk a little bit about your imagery and the inspiration of aspens. And I know we covered this in your last podcast, but let's go through that again. What's the context of why do you love painting aspens?
It goes back to an experience I had, like one of the first times I walked into an aspen grove. It was a feeling of a deja vu, something I experienced before, and which was I was born and raised in Europe, and one of the things my parents loved to do was to take us on road trips, and often we went to visit like castle ruins or churches and cathedrals, and so I was born and raised as an atheist, and so there was I never really participated in mass, but there was something about me walking into a cathedral as a child, just feeling this energy. So when I walked into Aspen Grove, it was like, it was that same feeling of this grandness and something bigger than me, and just kind of had to paint it, and been kind of thinking about it these last few months, painting these series. Like, what is it about just this constant repetition of painting the aspen, and not to really dive into the religion or spirituality because I'm just such a novice at it. It's kind of like a personal journey. But, just kind of reflected on what the painters in the past really did. Like they painted something that moved them. So I kind of felt like this was sort of my way of, like I already mentioned, it was kind of like a part of a journey just to kind of figure out what, why this kind of a feeling, why this attraction, really like just the answers to the questions, like, like why are we here?
The beginning or sense of spirituality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that is awesome. I totally get it, especially with the aspen scenes lined up.
Yeah.
Like in the main painting here. This was a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
One thing that about Eunika as well, she's pretty good at photography. And so I'm sure when she's hiking, she's taking cool pictures. But I love the perspective on this piece. How did you get it? What drew you to this scene?
I painted another painting similar to this one before, and just thinking about, how to paint, like you said, how to make a different landscape. And I know a lot of aspens kind of get painted just because of the barks and just this perspective, like looking into the grow or like through the barks, because you get this sort of like a whiteout if you're in a very dense one. And it's just done a lot. And so it's just this constant thinking of like how to make it different. So just the idea of looking up, that has a spiritual aspect to it. So I started looking up and taking pictures of it. It's actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
It is really hard. I was going back out there and taking pictures of it because you have to get the right light, because otherwise it's kind of washed out. So it has to be the perfect lighting, the perfect angle, and of course the perfect trees. They don't come perfect. Mm-hmm. Like we don't come perfect. They're very different actually. The aspen trees they have different growths have different characteristics, and just painting them so much and notice what I like in aspen. It's it's obviously those eyes, but not all of them have them. It's kind of interesting.
You mean the dark spots?
Yeah. So it has to be. Yeah.
So what is the hardest part of this painting process? Is it the drawing before you apply the paint?
The hardest part.
Yeah. What is the most difficult part of what you're doing?
I think obviously figuring out where the clay is going to go. I call it like mapping it out. So what I do is I draw out the areas where different clays are going to be featured. Painting has, with clay has kind of taught me not to mix it too much. It actually does not look good. Mm-hmm. It kind of takes the luminescence. That's the best way to describe it out of the color of the clay, kind of muddies.
So it's mostly just a raw color of what you're using.
Yeah. It's how it comes out of the ground. But let's say if I were to combine, kind of like, let's say these two brown colors, it would not come the way you think they would come out. Like if you study like color theory or something.
So once you apply it wet, does it change in aesthetic as it dries, or does it stay true to its own natural color?
So it stays to it's a natural color the way it came on the ground, but when I'm applying it wet, it has a different color.
Okay.
So that makes it. I see what you're getting.
That
makes it
right?
hard. So there was a painting I did, the last painting, which I didn't think was going to happen. The two clays.
Well, let's go walk
Even
over
though
there and look
they're
at
different, they were exactly the same color, and I thought I was going to go mad. It took me a long time to make it, which is why I was painting to the last hour, to finish it. Yeah, these two, they're kind of greenish clays. When they're wet, they're exactly the same color, and it was almost it was almost like a dizzying kind of.
Well, up close, if you're looking at it like that, it's dizzying.
Yeah.
As you stand back, it transforms into the painting that you're wanting, and that's pretty complex. I think the other thing I really like about your process and style and the uniqueness of it is the labor intensity of what you're doing. It's not like you can just whip these out. It takes time and a lot of thought process to construct a scene. Let's move to the middle one here, which is a larger format of another grove. And you can tell that this took a lot of time to map out. Probably the drawing maybe took you longer than applying the clay, because you figured out in the drawing process where you want the clay.
Yeah. Yeah. The size actually, just from this experience, the bigger size actually is easier to deal with, and it's because everything is a little bit more spread out. Mm-hmm. Just because what I paint with a very, very fine brush. And so when it's loaded up with clay, it's very clunky. And so finding the right consistency,
like
finding the right texture of
it,
finding the right way. So it's not too watery, it's not too sticky.
Mm-hmm.
So it can really create a fine line. So these smaller ones, there was a lot of fine lines. It was almost like, I started in the air, just kind of until it touched the canvas ever so lightly. But here it was just kind of like on canvas. I didn't have to sort of trick it.
Mm-hmm. How is it, this has a lot more color, like the other one we were talking about over there, or the end one. How is it working more in monochromatics, like this?
So this was kind of like the winter scene.
Uh-huh.
Where everything is white.
Including the background.
Yeah. This was actually not that bad, just because when each of these clays is wet, it has a slightly different color, but there's enough contrast where I can see where I'm actually putting it.
When I'm looking at that, thinking about how you constructed this, I would get lost. It's like a big puzzle. Actually, if we'd made this into a puzzle on our print shop,
that
would be a really
hard
puzzle.
Tough one. Yeah.
Because it's really complex. But as you stand back, clarity begins, and it's a pretty cool scene. And then I do like the use of different colors, but that monochromatic's pretty cool too, because I do love black and whites in general.
So this one actually features this. I was kind of going for that white, purpley kind of light that you get in the winter. So this one actually has a purple clay from Utah, which I need to go back and get more. I'm running out. It's so cool, and I hope it's still there. And then I just wanted to match something a little bit with a purplish tint. So
with the hue that's on that side. Well, I really appreciate you and your efforts, and this is a beautiful body of work.
Thank you.
And really appreciate having you here at Blue Rain Gallery, and we're looking forward to many years of representation.
Thanks, Leroy.
A very humble soul here. Anyways, I'd like to thank everybody for watching our podcast. You can sign up for us on any of your platforms, or you can go to blueraingallery.com under the menu bar podcasts. Obviously, I want to remind you that we did podcast with Eunika before for more information on where she comes from and her development into this career. I'd like to encourage everybody to also go to our online store where you can find some of Eunika's products as well, bluerainprintshop.com, where you can take art into your everyday life. Thank you for watching.